This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Kandi Wiens on the show. She comes to us from the University of Pennsylvania. Today we're going to be talking about her book, Burnout Immunity, which is something that we can all get help with. Anyway, with all that being said, Kandi, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John.
If you don't mind, tell the audience a little bit about your background and kind of how you got to where you are today in your career, and why is it that you decided to write this book?
Yeah. Okay. So I was a management consultant for about 22 years, had a pretty lucrative career, but it was also a very stressful career. I did a lot of operations consulting in healthcare systems and some in higher ed. But I, after about 15 years of that, I noticed that my stress level was starting to amp up more and more, especially after having 3 kids and I was working full time. And in 2011, I ended up having a life-threatening health crisis that really woke me up, and it was all stress-induced. It wasn't because of some genetic condition or anything like that. It truly was because of stress. And I later came to find out that the level of stress that I was operating at, to me, it felt like it was pretty normal. And it was as if burnout was my new baseline, as if that's just the level that I and everyone else was operating at almost all the time. And so then in 2011, when I had this health scare, which turned out to be a hypertensive emergency, after going in just for a routine annual exam with my doctor, my blood pressure came back at a 200/110, which is downright scary. I could have had a stroke or a heart attack, or could have even died in that moment. And the doctor, when she called my husband, had him come and pick me up, and she was describing to us just, what was going on with me, and wanted me to really consider taking an extended amount of time off of work. And I couldn't even imagine that, because I was so wrapped up in my job. And long story short, I spent the next several days, of course, just recovering physically. But then I took my doctor's advice very seriously and really did start thinking deeply just about how much stress I was experiencing at work, and what some changes that I wanted to make. So I started reading everything I could get my hands on about wellness and stress management and all of that, and started to really geek out on it. I loved learning about it. And a couple of years later, I decided to enroll in a doctoral program at the University of Oregon because I wanted to study this stuff for real. I wanted to really dig into it and do my own studies. And what I was most fascinated by was people who work in really high stress jobs or cultures or professions, but they're not burned out, because if you were to survey just about in really any company, any burnout survey, there's always a group of people who some are burned out and others who are not. And I really wanted to learn from the ones who were not. So that's kind of where I started my studies. And then it's eventually grown over the last 10 years. I've now studied over 2,000 people. With 200 of those have been in-depth interviews with people who tell me that their stress level is severe, very severe, or worst possible stress for 6 months or more. So not just one bad day, but build up of long-term stress. Yet when I assess their level of burnout, they're not burned out. So I was just really, really interested to find out, what are these people doing and what can we learn from them, and how can we help other people not get burned out when they're in really high intensity jobs or don't have opportunities to recover like they should in order to sustain their energy level at work.
Yeah, I remember reading a book a long time ago. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was one of Simon Sinek's book, and there he talked about stress at work, and it was the cortisone, chemical that our body's not supposed to have in there all the time. That occurs whenever we get in a stressful environment. And it sounds like when you go through those stressful environments and you have that excess cortisone in your body all the time, it leads to these health problems like what you experienced and what others experience. during your research, and what are you finding that's that's kind of causing us to stay stressed at work?
Well, I think, I find this both in my research interviews, but also I do just like a lot of practitioner work. I'm an executive coach and leadership coach, do a lot of leadership development. And I hear my workshop participants tell me often, in fact, almost every week when I've got a group of leaders that I'm working with, they're telling me burnout is their new baseline. It's like everybody's operating at such an amped up level, especially since, after people started going back to work after COVID, and a lot of organizations were trying to make up for lost time, lost productivity, lost revenue, really. There's been more pressure on employees and on leaders to put more pressure on their employees. And so we're finding that a lot of cultures have we've seen this movement where it's just a rite of passage, almost like it's an expectation that people are going to get burned out. And I tell you, that's just not a healthy way to live personally. And it's also not a good approach to leadership. If you are truly interested in bringing out the best in your people, burning them out is not the way to do it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I know in tech, it's almost like a rite of passage, like you were saying. And I remember one of the worst bosses I've ever had, he was telling me and my team once that if you're not experiencing burnout, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. It's like, yeah,
that exactly, John. Like that kind of quote, I hear that kind of stuff all the time, and it's really unfortunate. I just think some of us need to stand up and change that narrative.
So, how do we go about doing that? Like when the culture is pushing us in a certain way, how do we, make a change for the better, especially as leaders?
It kind of depends where you are in the leadership structure. If you have a lot of power and authority in your leadership role, obviously there's a lot more that you can do, and a lot you can influence those, say, at the executive level to make some cultural changes or systemic changes. And so that's one way if you're a more senior leader. But if you're a more junior leader, like let's say you're first-time manager, first-time leader, or just one level up, then it's really just focusing on your team. And I know those of you who are listening, you might be getting pressure from your boss and up and so forth, pressure on yourself to perform, but then also pressure for you to push your employees. And I think you guys are in a data-driven profession. So get your hands on some data that show that when people burn out, their productivity drops. When people burn out, there's higher turnover. When people burn out, it leads to all kinds of bad things. And I bet we could find things in the tech industry that are really specific to what's going on with how burnout is impacting the bottom line or other operational metrics. And then, oftentimes leaders will then start listening to the data.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it leads to, more bugs in code, more rework problems and expenses like that, probably more deadlines missed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is we as leaders, let's say we are that, frontline manager and we need to, kind of help our people and focus on them. What can we do specifically to try to alleviate burnout and reduce the stress that's being built up on our team?
Yeah. And that's what leaders are there for. I mean, most leaders in almost any profession, any organization, the common goal of leadership is to bring out the best in your people, both performance-wise, but also just their creativity, their critical thinking skills, all of that, right? So there are things you can do, and definitely take this seriously. There are things you can do as a leader to bring out the best in your people without burning them out. And one of the strategies I would encourage your folks to think about is this concept called the sweet spot of stress. We all need some level of stress in order to perform at our best or to be the most creative or have the best critical thinking skills. We get a little more stress than we should have, and then we tip out of that sweet spot of stress. So for leaders, you need to understand what your conditions are that keep you in your sweet spot of stress, help you really perform at your best. And maybe even pushing yourself, challenging yourself, but not to the point where you are making mistakes or you're creating bad dynamics in your team or any other result of just starting to feel distressed or potentially even burned out. So you pay attention to that, all of those signs and symptoms for yourself. And when you notice yourself slipping out of that sweet spot of stress, finding ways to get yourself back, whether that's things that you do on the weekends or in whatever your personal time is, or even taking micro breaks throughout the day just to help you sustain your energy levels. But then as a leader, so you can role model that for your direct reports. That's really important. The role modeling will make an impact on them, but also just having open conversations with your team about, okay, we have, these tight deadlines. We have high intensity period of work that we're going to be going through. And it has this upcoming period of work, the next couple of months, has the potential to burn us all out. What can we do collectively as a team? And then individually, what can each of us do to really protect ourselves from slipping past that sweet spot of stress? So even just having open conversations about it and having some common language around our common goal is to all of us to perform at our best, deliver our best, but also not wreak havoc on our personal lives or our health.
Yeah. Do you ever see people take it too far the other direction? Like the pendulum swings too much and they overdo it and they get out of that sweet spot by, reducing it too much?
Yeah. I've heard, so one of the things we're seeing is that the younger generation, so folks that are just coming out of college or within the last 5-6 years going into the workforce, is that many of them have learned to advocate for themselves by their parents or just by conditions they were introduced to during COVID, where there was a lot more conversation, a lot more normalization about taking care of your mental and psychological well-being. And so those younger generations are advocating for themselves more, and they are pushing back to their leaders more about their well-being, and almost to the point where, like you said, it's like a pendulum where it's gone too far. And that's definitely a leadership challenge. So it's, again, I think part of it starts with having just open conversations about what is expected of everybody in order to meet individual and team goals. And let's do this in a way where we know that we're going to be stressed. We know we're going to be maybe not at our maximum level of stress, but it's going to push us and challenge us. Just being really, really clear in what the expectations are.
Yeah. And I agree with you 100%. I think some stress is definitely necessary and good. And I have to put artificial stress on myself sometimes to get myself motivated. I'll give myself deadlines that don't really exist. Like there'll be something we're working on that's really more of a strategy thing. We're not really putting a deadline on it, but I'll go and put deadlines myself so that I hold myself accountable to do it. Because if I don't have that deadline, I'll just kind of kick the can down the road and not get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I've heard that a lot. I mean, I've heard that from a lot of people. Whatever it takes for you to again, like that's for you, John, that's like getting clear on what are the conditions that really optimize your performance, that put you in that sweet spot of stress. And one condition is that you like to have some pressure of a deadline. And so there are other conditions too, like how much, who's supporting you, who you think about all the conditions and all the people who could potentially support you to bring the best out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important thing to try to identify. And it sounds like as a leader, we need to make sure we identify what the things are for us to get in that sweet spot and then look at our team. Is that what you're saying?
It is, yes. Yeah. And really encourage leaders to have open conversations about this. I've found that when leaders do open up the conversation and normalize it, they can, number one, be much more clear and explicit about their expectations. That my expectation is that we all we're in this together as a team. My expectation is that we are going to be working however many hours a week, which might be higher than the norm. My expectation is that we will raise our hands when it's getting too much and where we feel like we're at a breaking point. And I think by opening the conversation, then you can start to come up with solutions with your team, not just you delivering or them providing solutions, but as a team discussing it.
Do you think we've had this culture shift with COVID where a lot of people were in the office and they were remote, and it almost blurred the line between work and home in a lot of ways. Has that contributed at all to the increased amount of stress and burnout that people have?
Yeah, and I think that varies widely depending on the expectations that were put on those employees, as well as what kind of pressure employees were putting on themselves. So I've heard many examples of people who have gone the opposite direction. When COVID hit and they were working from home, they then turned into quiet quitters, where it just became more disengaged in their work, and it was easier for them to slack off or not perform at a level that they were when they were in the office. And then I've also heard many, many stories of people saying, well, when we were sent home, I actually doubled up, or it felt like tripled up on my workload. and work just never stopped. All the lines between personal and professional just got majorly blurred. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to boundaries that you need to be clear with yourself on. Again, clear on your conditions that keep you at a peak performance level. And that might require you to put in place and enforce some boundaries with your team that maybe weren't there before.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I kind of went through my own personal pendulum when COVID happened, where I was always on and always working, checking, I had Messenger open. I was constantly seeing what was going on and responding. I felt like I needed to validate that I was working, so I responded right away,
right.
A lot faster than I would if I was in the office and, someone called me or emailed me or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then I got to the point where I realized there was a book that I read. I don't remember who wrote it. I apologize for that. It's called Boundaries for Leaders. Uh-huh. And the reason why I picked that book up is because we had went through a study with our children. It was boundaries for parents, and it was about how to set boundaries with your kids. And I saw the same author had a boundaries for leaders, so I picked it up. And in reading it, it told me about how to set boundaries about like how quickly I'll respond to certain things. And when I'm at dinner, I don't need to touch my phone. Just creating those kind of made me go back and find a happy medium in between that expectations. But I have some friends that still they put in so many more hours because they're working remote than they would have if they went to an office.
Yeah. And I would say a lot of that comes down to choice. And so choosing to create boundaries and enforce those boundaries, or choosing to let those boundaries blur. And for some people that works. Some people, I go through periods where I don't mind getting emailed on the weekends or even having a call on the weekend or in the evening or whatever, because I know that there are also periods during the week when I can go to the gym for an hour if I want to, because I have, flexibility and control over my schedule. Mm-hmm. So I think people just need to find really what works for them and their organization, but also really keeping an eye on whether you're making sacrifices personally that might be okay in the short run, but in the long run, they're just not sustainable to your long-term performance or your long-term health.
Yeah, so it sounds like some of the things we really need to do is to, make sure we have those clear expectations and communicate them and have open conversations about them, create boundaries, and then what do we do once we find that, gosh, we are burned out? How do we get back out of it?
Yeah. So the last chapter of the book is what I call the 3RX prescription. It's the 3 R's are recover, reconnect, and reimagine. I write a lot about recovery, including micro recovery. So if you were to, for example, look at professional athletes or Olympians, they have active recovery built into their training schedule. Marathon runners, same thing. And if you're in a job that is psychologically or mentally challenging and taxing, you need to do the same thing, which is give your psyche and your brain breaks. Might be more frequent micro breaks throughout the day. I know a lot of tech companies, they've got the ping pong tables and different co-working spaces where people can just go mingle and hang out and socialize and that kind of thing. Those are all good. Those are all great ways to just keep your energy sustained throughout the day. But there are also times when, and we're all different, by the way, are also times when we really, really just need an extended break, whether that's an actual vacation, or if you've been in your career for, say, 15 or more years, you might be due for a sabbatical because you've just been pushing yourself really hard for 10 to 15 years. So there are many different forms of recovery. We all need it. The message here isn't that we need it. I think everybody knows that. But the message is that you have to prioritize it if you are serious about your performance and your well-being. And then the second R is about reconnecting. So when you're recovering, it's really important to reconnect to the people, places, and experiences that bring you joy, that give you positive energy and can help offset maybe any negative energy that you're around in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So that's why relationships are so important. Connecting to our values is really important in this phase of recovery. And experiences, whether that's a hobby or things you love to do on the weekend, but really doing things and doubling down on the things that bring you joy and happiness outside of work and help you identify, with something other than your work. And then the final R is about reimagining. So this is really more for people who are extremely burned out and might have to take a leave of absence or maybe even leave their organization while they look for something else. where their recovery is maybe longer because of the extended nature of their burnout. Reimagining is about when you go back into the workplace, whether it's your old company or a new one, is really reimagining what kind of relationship you want to have with work. Because when we go to work, it's not just a job, it's not just a career, it's not just whatever hours. We actually have a relationship with work. And if you were to think about it that way, you can then start to reimagine a more healthy version of your relationship with work, really thinking more about how does work fit into your life rather than the other way around.
So let me ask you this. This may be an opinion question. It may not even be a good question at all. But like if we're a leader and we notice someone isn't really taking vacations, they haven't really taken off work, and they're just constantly committed to work, and you don't see what that outside thing is. Like you have your one-on-ones, you ask them about like how, questions about things, and you kind of see they're starting to get burned out. Mm-hmm. Do you push the boundary a little bit, like push them into taking a vacation, taking time off and stepping away, or how do you handle that delicate situation?
That's a really great question, John. I think that's part of a mentor role that most leaders wear, that mentor hat. Mm-hmm. And so you can approach it as your direct reports leader, and that's more of a power-based conversation. But I would encourage people to put on their mentor hat, where it's more like you really actually care about that person's, not just their performance because they work for you, but you actually are concerned about maybe their well-being. And so encouraging them and opening up a little bit and say, when I was at your point in my career, and I was just like, you remind me so much of myself. I was throwing myself into work 24/7. And, here's what it did to me. And you share whatever story you have to share. And I think that would help. Sometimes people, like the direct report that you're talking about, have some belief that they have to work 24/7. They might be making assumptions about the way that they're being evaluated, or they might feel really ashamed of the fact that they might not have a social life outside of work. And so they need help. They might need a little help connecting with other people to create a stronger social environment. So you as a mentor playing that role as a leader can help them just see what they can't see.
Yeah, and it's always a tough thing to tackle. But yeah, having that mentor role, being able to say, I care about you, and this is, and I love the way you talked about how you can share a story about how, it affected you when you were in that role, in that situation. Mm-hmm. I think that's very helpful because, I think we've all gone through those time periods where we're overdoing it. We're putting too much into it one way or the other. And, for me, I remember getting to a point after, I don't remember if it was after my first kid or my second kid was born, where I just basically had to go to my boss and be like, look, I'm going to leave work between 5 and 6. I'm not going to stay super late. And when I'm at home until my kid goes to bed, I'm not going to check email. I'm like, but afterwards I'll jump back on and check if I need to. I'll do, but I need to take that time because this is not working for me.
Yes, that's a great example of advocating for yourself in a really healthy way.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I can use that story to talk to people and try to explain to them like, this is how I did it. What could you do?
Yep. Yeah, because everybody's solution will be a little different. But I think when I hear leaders sharing their own story and they share a little bit of vulnerability, that definitely helps people feel more comfortable speaking up about what they're experiencing.
Yeah. So I want to also go back to the recovery, that you talked about a little bit, because one of the things that I try to do is to take time during the day to kind of do some recovery things, whether that's taking a meeting by walking outside or, or something like that. What are some other tips that we have to try to do those little, I think you call them micro breaks or something like that before, to help us recover during the day?
Yeah, and it kind of depends on the type of job that you have. But let's say you are in the tech industry and you're on screen a lot. You might not want to do something that's on screen during your recovery time. So maybe going outside for a walk. I love your idea. I do this too, by the way, the walk and talks. I have a lot of my one-on-one updates or just some of my more casual work-related calls. I do them through calls, and we just agree, you know what, this is actually one of those conversations that we don't need to do because we've been staring at the screen all day long, so let's take a break that way. Another one that I hear often is to just go look at pictures or photos of maybe vacations that you've been on that you have really great memories, or if you're a parent, looking at photos or videos of your kids anything that's going to evoke positive emotion, or could be making a quick phone call to one of your buddies, or your brother, your sister, someone that you connect with that you just haven't talked to in a while, and just have a conversation that's not work related. And I think the key here is to just distract yourself from work a little bit. And that's okay. Distractions are actually a good thing for us psychologically, as long as we can get ourselves back on the mental track we need to. But when you distract yourself with things that evoke positive emotions, that will help you regain your energy when you go back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that a lot of times when I'm stuck on a problem and I distract myself either with a walk or with something totally different, I'll come up with a solution without even realizing it. Or I'll come back to it, and when I come back to it, it's like my brain is firing on a different level.
Exactly. Yes, I had that when I was writing the book. I would get writer's block, and that was my cue to myself. Oh, okay, this means I need to take some kind of a break because the words just aren't coming to me. So yeah, distraction can be a very effective technique to get back to your best.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things in your title, you talk a little bit about emotional and social intelligence. Can you help me understand the difference between emotional intelligence and social intelligence?
Yep. So emotional intelligence is about, it's having an awareness of myself and my ability to manage or regulate myself. And that includes awareness of my emotions, my thoughts, and my behaviors. And knowing how to label my emotions, how to process my emotions in a really productive, healthy manner. That's all the self-awareness and self-management stuff. Then social awareness is having an awareness of your impact on other people in the social environment. But it also is the reverse of that as well. What is the impact that my social environment has on me and my stress levels or on my well-being? Social awareness has a lot, like some of the specific competencies are empathy, which is the ability to see things from other people's perspective. Social intelligence has to do with our ability to manage conflict productively with other people. It also includes the ability to work very effectively in a team environment, or if you're a leader, the ability to influence other people, including your direct reports, but also peers and other people that don't have the same goals as you. So if you think about the difference between self-awareness, self-management, which is EI, and then social intelligence is more about understanding your social environment and knowing how to work really effectively with other people by building strong relationships with them.
Yeah, and I don't want to stereotype us tech geeks, but sometimes we struggle a little bit with this social intelligence and understanding that. Is there anything that we can do to kind of help build that awareness of how we're impacting and how others impact us? Because I know for me, I will, just say sometimes what comes to my head and not realize the effects that I'm having on those around me.
Here's a really simple technique, and I love that you asked this question, is let's say you're in a team meeting and you say what's on your mind. You're the leader, you have your direct reports, you say what's on your mind. Instead of just like moving on to the next thing and assuming that everybody's following you, just pause and say, what did you hear me say? Or how did that land with you? Or what do you think about what I just shared? Just asking any kind of question that prompts people to give you their thoughts on or their takeaway from what they heard. Oftentimes, they might be hearing something totally different than what you just told them or heard it in a different way. And so you might need to clarify what your intention was or what you really meant. And that's a process of better understanding the impact that you have on other people.
Yeah, that helps a lot, because I think that's one of those things that helps you get the perspectives right, from the people around you, and kind of have that lens so you understand, like, this is what I said and what I meant, but this is how you saw and heard that. So
yeah. What did you hear me say?
Yeah.
What are you taking away from what we just talked about?
Yeah, I think that's really good. What last pieces of advice or information do you have for anybody that may be interesting in how to not just, maybe we're not burned out right now, but we want to make sure we don't get into a place where we're like this. And I know we have those 3 R's, we have the prescriptions, we have that, but what last pieces of advice do you have just to keep ourselves out of burnout?
Here's an easy one, and one that your listeners can do right now within the next 7 or 8 minutes. You can go to my website at kandiwiens.com, and the first thing that will pop up is called the Burnout Quiz. That's an instrument. It's a tool that I created based on my research. when you take it, it's going to take you literally less than 5 minutes to answer the questions. It will come back and let you know whether you're at low, moderate, or high risk of burning out. So by having a better understanding of your risk level, you can then begin to think about really specific things that you might need to do to dial things back if you're at high risk. And when you get your results report, which, by the way, when you take the survey, it's completely anonymous. I don't know who you are. I don't even look at the data, so I don't share it with anybody. But when you get your results report back, you'll also get some recommendations from me. So if you're at high risk of burnout, you'll see a list of specific things that you can do to bring yourself back into your sweet spot of stress.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tool. And I'll link that too in the show notes at geekleader.com so people can click through and take that burnout quiz, which I'm going to be taking as soon as we finish this call.
Great.
But how can people connect with you online, learn more about what you do, and pick up a copy of your book?
Best place to go is just my website, KandiWiens.com. You'll find a lot of free resources out there. I've got, I think, 11 Harvard Business Review articles. I just released a Fast Company article, a Time article. This is all original writing, or some of them are excerpts from the book. And so you can find some really good free resources. I also have a monthly blog where I put out the latest and greatest of what I'm learning about and sharing it with people so they don't have to wait for the book or the next book. And then you'll find information there about the book, and you can even order it right there on my website. So really encourage people to check it out and share it with people. The other thing I'd say too, John, about that burnout risk assessment, if you and your teammates take it, that's another great way to just bring this up in a conversation and begin to have healthier conversations and discussions about everybody's well-being and mental health.
I think that's a great idea because you could have your whole team kind of say, hey, this is a free assessment. Go ahead and take it. And then have another meeting. Maybe we get together and talk about it and just share.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic. All right. Awesome. I'll link that in the show notes too, as well as a link to your website and your book. Kandi, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate having you on.
Thanks, John. I enjoyed talking to you.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.